Enthusiasm with multi-tonal voice.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Are we going?
Yeah, everything's recording.
Oh, we're actually recording.
Yeah, so just whenever you want, start. Feel free. Go crazy.
I want. So Matt, tell me about your stag do.
Stag do.
I think you made a very fetching aubergine.
Thank you. Well, I had two stag do's. The first one was like 2 days camping out like in the South Downs, where Kirk's brother Greg, he obviously lives in LA, and at one point we stopped. He wasn't there with us, and we stopped in a pub to just get a drink. And I ordered something from behind the bar, and it was him serving. He'd snuck back without me knowing, so that was pretty trippy. And then we spent a sort of big night out in Brighton, and I was dressed as an aubergine.
Brighton is like the staple stag do place, isn't it?
Wasn't it? A little bit of fluff, come here. There we go. That's better. But didn't you went to you darts, didn't you?
Well, yeah.
You thought you were going to look odd, but then every other person was dressed like a vegetable.
Well, yeah. Everyone else was dressed super weird, and in fact, the guys that weren't dressed up, I was the one that like fitted right in.
Yeah.
And it was funny actually. We sit next to this person dressed as a lobster. And I was really like good friends with them. We were all a bit drunk and getting like when you're just a bit rough and stuff. Took the head off. It was a woman. I wouldn't have minded, but I'd have been a bit less rough if I'd have known.
I would just like, should we come back to my place?
Yeah, I think kicking her head in was probably a bit over the top. Oh dear.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
So I don't know if Kirk's really like kind of filled you in on what this podcast is about, but we're just kind of just chatting.
Yeah.
Faffing
about.
Yeah. So, yeah, we just figure if we do it once a week for a year, then our conversation skills and addiction can only improve.
Yeah, totally.
But it's actually just strangely, I found it quite strangely enjoyable. Just setting like you rarely actually set aside just an hour, just have a chat.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, unless you're in the pub.
Yeah.
Like something you rarely do sober, I think.
But even then, they sort of get derailed.
There's a bit of a buffer, isn't
Yeah.
there?
Yeah.
I think I discovered that with your cult meetings.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, I like,
Cult meetings.
yeah. It's like,
I'll double check.
yeah, you pretty much only have these sorts of conversations sitting in a pub, and then they're substandard because everyone slowly gets more drunk and talks over each other.
Yeah, exactly.
And you can't remember what you spoke about.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Well, I think the idea for those cult meetings.
Perhaps explain what is it you do and what's the origin
well,
of this?
yeah.
You sacrifice children.
So,
eat their hearts.
So, well, about a year ago, I just I sort of noticed that people were sharing things and making sort of comments on Facebook about political stuff, and obviously everything was like very politically like charged at the time, Brexit and Trump getting in, and I just thought, why not just rent out a room in some local community centre, £7 an hour, didn't think it was too bad, and just have some rough themes, politically related, just to have a semi-structured conversation about it, because I got to 30 and I thought, when I wake up tomorrow, I'm going to understand politics and all the way the world works. And I woke up and I was like none the wiser, and I thought, well, I don't know what any of the words meant, capitalism or communism. So even if I had to give all of the talks or presentations, at least it would give me some incentive to just, look these things up. So it's more, we sort of have these 2-hour conversations that's roughly sort of political theory, I'd say. Sometimes it's about current events.
Yeah. Have you read? We've spoken about the *Sapiens* book.
Yeah.
About Noah Harari. I've sort of listened to it about 3 times now. It's so good, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's just a great, covers so many different, such a broad range of topics. But I don't know, he gets it so spot on, doesn't he?
Yeah, he does. In fact, I listened to his interview with Sam Harris.
Oh, that was good as well. Yeah.
A couple of days ago, and he's just extremely eloquent, and I always feel super embarrassed when someone whose first language isn't English like talks so eloquently, and I can't say anything beyond like bonjour, and this guy is giving this like rousing prose about, you know, the history of
Yeah.
humanity, essentially.
I think it was the first sort of concise description of how like modern economics works and has come to be that I've ever heard, and I kind of went, oh, like, it was quite enlightening.
Yeah.
It's not saying you expected to be in the book, but there's quite a lot of different topics he covers, aren't there?
Yeah, and I was
It's
sort of
quite
expecting it to
philosophical.
be more about like prehistory, actually, whereas like that, if I remember rightly, was only a very small fraction of the beginning of the book. And I suppose in some sense that makes sense.
And I suppose because he focuses, I guess it's the summary of the change, isn't it?
Yeah.
So if we lived a certain way and it didn't change for thousands of years,
Yeah.
there's sort of nothing else to. You're not talking about what specific people did, are you? If it doesn't change, then I
Yeah,
guess
he makes that
there's no
exact point, doesn't he? Like he says, if you sent, he used the example of armies, but he said if you sent like the Roman army back to middle against an army in the Middle Ages, they'd probably be pretty well balanced. Whereas within the last few centuries, even if you sent an army from the 90s back to the 70s, there would be it would be like so one-sided.
Yeah.
So I suppose, like you say, if he's looking at change, then that has mostly happened recently.
Have you ever fantasised about turning up to a medieval battle with a machine gun?
You know what? Quite funny enough, I was thinking
Yeah.
about something not too far off today.
Yeah.
Because we was in Battlesbridge, and I found out that, like, you know, they have little plaques and they say like the history and origin. And Battlesbridge, like that area is 1,000 years old. And I was like, then I was looking at a few other buildings, and I'm like 1500, 1600. I'm thinking like, what would it have been like, you know, living in that time. And then a jump from like 5 centuries, and then just thinking about only the last 20 years, how crazy everything's advanced in 20 years, and it's so cumulative. And you're thinking like, what would happen in another 20 years, or 50 years, or like in 100 years? Like how insane
Yeah. I mean, often.
things can progress.
Yeah. I often say this. It's amazing how quickly humans just adapt, and it becomes a new normal, and you can just get on with it, don't you? But I don't know. I mean, it seemed this is it's probably the biggest change in a generation that's ever happened in human history.
Well,
Do you
yeah.
think
Think about
that's? I don't
grandparents.
think that's an overstatement.
No, no, for sure.
Like this, we're living for a technological revolution. So much has changed. I don't think we quite sort of acknowledge that very often.
The internet only started in the 90s, and I mean, it
Yeah.
feels like it's been around forever.
I know. It's like, yeah, I talked to my granddad, and he sort of lived through just such incredible change. It's
Yeah.
like no wonder he can't operate his TV remote.
I do worry about getting to that stage where
Yeah.
we're the ones going, put your DVD in. They're going, what's a DVD?
I know, yeah. Think about that.
And everything's gonna be like those chips in your head. Stuff. But didn't Elon Musk say he like met up, was it with Tim Cook and like a few other big names, and said you need to slow down on this AI progression because it's way too quick.
Yeah. And
Like-
Elon Musk, kept saying it, and I think he's reached a point. He's like, no one's listening to me.
Yeah.
But,
I mean,
yeah.
well, Sam Harris takes that position as well, I think. You know, at least have some sort of like ethical framework before you.
Jump ahead.
Yeah.
I was thinking about this with sort of age. I definitely think there's a bit of a culture. Do you think there's a bit of a culture of people not in this country not respecting their elders enough? Do you
What
think that's-
in the UK or
Yeah,
elsewhere?
I guess. Well, I'm speaking
'Cause it's-
only because I live in the UK. I don't need
'Cause
to
there's
have any
some-
other any other reference points.
I'd imagine elsewhere they'd have a bit more respect. There's a more of a like foundation on hierarchy in the elders
yeah.
rather than.
But
in
because I was
here.
thinking that, but I wonder whether sort of tribal cultures have more. I wonder whether because things are changing so rapidly with technology, that, like we say, maybe older people's their sort of ancient wisdom is no longer useful
Yeah,
because they don't know how
it's
to
not
operate
relevant.
the MacBook.
No, I
Whereas if you're in a tribal culture, you're still in the same forest and
Yeah.
all that
Mhm.
knowledge of what plant to eat and what to do at certain times of year and
Yeah.
how to. It's kind of all that wisdom is stored, and they're
I think everything's got to work in a circle, because everything progresses, and then we just repeat. History just repeats itself all the time. So we're gonna get that point where we're like, yeah, we know more than you, like to the older guys. And then as soon as we come to that point, the generation can be like, we know way more than you, and then we'll just keep going around.
I think like the current zeitgeist is just that we sort of rebel against any type of authority, and like that's ever since the Enlightenment, really. Before then it was just like, if you wanted answers, you just go to the vicar or go to the elders, and then people went, actually we don't get knowledge from authority anymore. It's now empiricism, and maybe that is sort of taken to the extreme now. But it almost gives you if that is the case, it almost gives you a guide then on the best way to get old, because if you want to stay useful, you should try and ingrain the knowledge that is not relevant, is not sort of just based in the current sort of technology. So
know what? Yes,
because it's timeless knowledge.
Timeless.
Yeah,
wisdom.
some sort of timeless. Yeah.
Yes.
So stuff about human nature, those type of things.
Yeah. Just sort of staying curious, and so I mean, you do. Is being discovered now that I think we have a lot more neuroplasticity than we previously thought.
What's that? Neuroplasticity?
Just the ability to learn and change your
you
brain structure through learning.
I think there's also.
Retained.
I was having a conversation with Viv, my brother, today, and we were saying how recently we're getting at that point, and like, tell me if you think the same way, that social media is kind of at this plateau where, because I brought it up because we was talking to about a friend of mine that just doesn't have very good attention span, and it's always social media, always like checking things, and like podcasts are becoming so more prevalent now. People just want to have a conversation and listen and talk. And what was my point? It was that I'm trying to remember now. I'll come back to it. It was all about technology, and we're coming to a point where it's reversing itself now.
Yeah, well, I kind of feel that with podcasts. I almost feel like we've come full circle, and now podcast is almost that sitting round the campfire, telling stories, isn't it?
Well, whenever I listen to a podcast that is just people having conversations, I almost sort of put myself there and go, okay, that's interesting. Sometimes I'll pause it and think like, oh, what would I have said then?
Yeah. Do you ever know the answer to something they're wondering about? And you go, oh, I wish I was there. I could tell them.
And then you're like, oh, this was recorded a year ago.
Yeah. You like comment, but what actually?
But I'm like super interested in memory and like how the brain works, and I don't know a lot about it. But I watched this really interesting documentary recently about they've done experiments with mice where the genome of the mice has been spliced in some ways with a certain type of algae, I believe it is, which means that they act normally. If you then inject the mouse with a certain chemical before it has some experience, the neural pathways that are created during that experience, i.e. like the memory, the physical like instantiation of the memory, has been, the algae part of it, this light sensitive algae part of it, has been activated by this chemical. So when this memory is formed, it is sensitive to light. So then what that means is that you can essentially shine a laser directly onto its brain, which they do with some looked pretty cruel experiments, to be quite honest, but they shine a laser into the brain. It activates that previous memory and it changes the behaviour of the mouse. So the memory that was, so in the particular example I saw, they injected the mouse with this particular chemical while it was in this really happy sort of safe environment. The memory of that safety was formed with this light sensitive algae. Then they put it in a dangerous environment where it was scared. They shined the laser straight onto its brain and it acted calm and relaxed again as if it was in the first.
That's some dark shit.
So yeah, the inference is that you could possibly do that with humans, and you could just trigger whatever memories you fancied.
That's like like magicians when they're like, and you'll snap out of it. Or like
Yeah.
It was
basically like a chemical version of that.
Just whip out the mag light and you start.
Oh, just like I'm having a really bad day. Just ding, and that's some like Black Mirror stuff.
It's crazy.
But I was just remembered what I was wanted to say, and I was talking about when technology is getting too advanced and social media is becoming way too buffered. Like there's always a buffer between conversations. Everyone's like, when like two people have an argument, but when they're in person, they wouldn't have that. And I think it's people not having enough conversation, like just talking and listening. And our listening skills are so crap now. I think because of social media and the internet creating this buffer.
Yes, I think being able to respectfully disagree with people seems to be a real challenge for a lot of people.
Yeah, it's not even like, oh, I disagree with your view. It's I disagree with you and you are wrong and
Yeah,
terrible.
and you're a Nazi.
Yeah, to think of that. And it's
People-
like,
people-
but let's have a chat. And so much problems would be solved if we just had a chat and just
Yeah.
see what we're like. Just let's talk about this.
Well, just people identify with their views, don't they? But it's like
Oh,
you,
yeah.
you are not your opinions. It's like,
People
it doesn't-
love-
you have to. For people like have to protect them. You're attacking them if you think a certain view. You challenge it, but it's.
It's like hooliganism. Like, if you support that football team, it's like, oh, if I don't like this player, you're attacking me because I support that.
Yeah.
And it's just like people get
so much
killed
comes
over
down
this
to
stuff.
tribalism, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I don't know if it's just from the fact that I used to sort of work in science and stuff, but I actually like being wrong. And it's almost like you have this contradictory feeling where you feel defensive and then you think, okay, well, I've learned, because if you're wrong, you've learned something.
Yeah. Yeah, you learn something new and you go, oh. Or even if you weren't, even if you've all of a sudden realised it's more complex than you thought, oh, it's a simple answer, and you go, oh, that is still kind of true, but that's not all the truth.
Yeah.
There's new layers there that I didn't think.
Well, that's a good point. It's like a lot of people just jump to conclusions and then they'll go, that's my opinion of it, and it's cemented now.
Yeah.
How do you think you can solve that? Is that an educational thing? Is that, I'm just trying to think, like, how can you fix that in, like, from a youth perspective? If, like, kids having that, because it's everyone likes to be in their own little community or like cliques and stuff, and that's kind of where it forms. But I think, do you think it's at an educational, like a school basis?
So much of it's
they can
tied
help?
up with ego, though, isn't it? I think we should be teaching more kids how to meditate from a young age. I think that would be immensely powerful.
Yeah.
There's a school. Sorry, I watched this on Facebook like a few days ago, and things that circulate around. And there was a school that instead of giving kids detention, they say you gotta meditate for like half an hour. And I thought it was genius. I was like, I would love to
Better
do that
than
as a
sitting around
kid.
doing nothing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think that's an excellent idea.
It's quite a nice positive reinforcement. Like, hey, you shouldn't have, not handed your homework in. But
Yeah,
'cause of that.
it's more prevent. You're trying to prevent it in the future, preventative rather than punishing, isn't it? I don't know, I'm sure they would still view it as punishment.
Yeah.
Making them meditate. But
I mean, to my own embarrassment, probably, it was a long time ago now, probably 10 years, I saw a poster at the university that said there's a conference on spirituality in early years learning or something like that, and it looked a bit fruity in terms of, it looked like it was to do with non-specific
bit woo.
religiosity, yeah. So I took down the email and I just straight away blurted out this probably rude email to the lady going, how can you teach nonsense, essentially? Because I was, when I first, I always heard about meditation. It always been related to sort of Eastern mysticism or something like that. And she came back with a very good answer about, I myself am an atheist, and we're actually teaching it from a sort of secular point of view. She said there are people like that there that are trying to sort of impose some beliefs on people, but it doesn't have to be like that. And I the more I've looked into meditation, especially like from a secular point of view, it seems like just a great thing.
Yeah, I really liked Sam Harris's book, Waking Up. I can't remember what the subheading was, but it's discussing secular spirituality.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think I'm interested in spirituality, but to me, it's exploring the nature of consciousness rather than being. You can do that in a secular way without being tied to a religion.
Well, yeah, I mean, I've read the book as well, and it's great. One thing, it's short.
Yes, yeah, that had a lot going for it. God, I love audiobooks.
Have you ever read it?
No. The last book I read was like Harry Potter. Like when I was like, I mean, aside from like blogs and web-based stuff, like actually physically picking a book up.
Yeah.
Oh, that just sounds like torture for me anyway.
I like to buy physical books for inspiration and ornament, but I generally consume a lot of books via audio.
I didn't think I would enjoy podcasts as much as I did. I think you're the one that introduced me to it, and it was amazing because I don't know, like if I was like, I'm bored today, I'm going to pick up a book. Like, that would never cross my mind. But I'd never have that thought. But I'd happily put like a 4-hour podcast and just sit there and do my thing and listen to people talk.
Yeah.
So I think I would like to try audiobooks. And because there's stuff that I do want to read. There's stuff that I am interested in. But I don't think I can sit there and read it. But if I was on a train or if I was on traveling or in a car, I would happily put it on.
That's it. And there are so many times where you're cooking food, taking the dog for a walk. Like say you're in the car, and you can just be absorbing all this interesting information while you're doing other things.
Yeah.
It took me. I made a conscious effort because I'd only for a long time I'd just read like textbooks, which gets a bit dry after a while. And then a few years ago I decided consciously to get back into reading even some fiction, that sort of thing. And it takes a while to get back into it. Like after about 50 pages I was thinking, Christ, when is this going to end? And it's like 400 pages, and once you're used to it, your attention span comes back.
Yeah. See, I'm trying, because I don't read particularly quickly, so I find it hard to. It doesn't seem like an efficient use of time often. But I'm trying. Have you ever tried any speed reading? Or I've been doing sort of half an hour every morning with a speed reading app.
Oh, right.
I try. It's on a. You can actually paste PDFs or things into it, so you're reading something you want to read anyway. But then there are different exercises. Yeah, they do different. I think part of it, what they talk about is what slows you up is the sub-vocalization. So even though you're not actually speaking in your head as you're reading it, you're sort of saying it out loud in your head. Yeah. They're saying, but the idea is you can actually, you do actually recognise the word, just like the shape of the word, and pick up the meaning. You shouldn't actually have to say it in your head. So part of it's that it flashes that up, and then, but then, like I say, and then part of it's the regression as well, because it's no good reading really quickly if you're not taking any of it in either, is it?
Do you think that's like the next evolution in reading? Because remember when like back centuries ago, when to read you can only read out loud. People couldn't read in their head. Yeah. And then when they decided like I can read in my head, that was like a huge thing. Yeah. And like now, if you're saying like the next point would be not vocalizing in your head, but you just take that knowledge in and you just keep going. That could be the next point.
Yeah. I don't see why not. It might be one of those things you eventually pick up and then think, oh wow, I can't believe I used to say every word in my head while I was.
Or someone just shines a laser on your brain and go, "There's that book."
Yeah,
dude. Oh my god! Morpheus. If there was like a little USB thing and just like bam, just load all that stuff.
I know kung fu.
That would be amazing.
There's this great, the Amazon Kindle app on your phone, and I have a Kindle as well. Sometimes when you buy a book, it will say add whisper sync for like an extra £2 or something. Ooh. And you get the audiobook and the physical book. Well, no, the electronic copy on your Kindle, and they're synced up. So you read on your Kindle and you put it down, and you put your headphones in and press play, and it reads from where you've just finished.
Oh, that's cool.
And then you press pause and you pick it up again. It's back.
Yeah,
it's great. It's really great.
About that. I wonder whether that might actually. I wonder if that would increase your reading speed. If you speed it up and go, you might get used to recognising the words.
Well, on the Kindle app on your phone, when it reads it, if you're looking at it, it flashes the word as it says it, and you can choose what speed.
Yeah,
I've played around.
Interesting to see if doing that often would increase your just normal reading speed. Interesting.
But what you mentioned about being interested in like just consciousness in general reminded me of this book I read recently called Other Minds, and it's I can't remember the name of the author, but he's a sort of zoologist, I think, and he studies octopuses and just cephalopods in general, so like squids and cuttlefish as well. And he makes a pretty convincing argument for the fact that if you rerun evolution again multiple times, there's no saying what you might get, because obviously you have the random mutation, then the selection. But because we diverged from cephalopods such a long time ago, 650 million years or something like that, it's almost like doing the experiment of what would happen if you rerun evolution again. And they have, like, obviously they're so different. I mean, they could potentially be an alien, but they still have eyes that are very similar to ours. They have like, in fact, they're better designed than ours in a weird kind of way, but they are proper lens eye. And they're also extremely intelligent, despite having such a very short lifespan. Actually, even the longest living ones live only like 4 years or something.
Wow.
But he sort of goes on to this like flight of fancy of what it would be like to be an octopus. And there are experiments on it, and it seems like, you know, with us, you have your mind is the sort of center of it, and your arms and your legs, they just do what your mind tells them to do. It seems like with cephalopods, the consciousness is partially distributed across the body, so the arms act autonomously.
Oh wow.
They couldn't do experiments that I can't remember how they did them, but they can do it so that it has to react in a sort of semi-clever way. The arm has to react in a semi-clever way.
The arm can problem
solve before the brain has had a chance to.
That's insane.
Because
Wow.
you get these, like, you have the main brain, where you'd expect it to be, in the head, which is all an octopus basically is, with a few arms. And then you get these sort of like ganglia, these sort of like just bundles of smaller brains essentially. But yeah, I just thought.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting.
We had a conversation earlier when I was in the car with my brother and his girlfriend, and we're saying that it was going back to the AI talk, and I was saying, if you can, let's say you're at a point, you know, you're in your deathbed, and they say, hey, we can put you in this body, and that would be you. It'll be a simulation of you, whether or not consciousness is a thing yet, because maybe at that point, you know, I don't know if you can transfer consciousness, but let's say, oh no, we got through it because talking about the ancestry, you know, and they're saying they might keep your DNA or something, like, because we're talking about you and you got your ancestry thing.
Yeah, ancestry DNA, yeah.
And I was saying, if they said, oh, we can make a simulation of you, like, would you want to do that? To have, like, your being out there? Like, can't confirm if it's yourself. They can't, like, transport your brain. But if they can load it up on, like, a USB and then just put it something else.
But then, yeah.
Would it be at the point of death, so there'd never be two versions of you, or would it be...
Well,
I think
people that you're... What's the opposite of ancestors?
What, like your
Descendants?
descendants?
Descendants.
Yeah,
Yeah.
future-
Your descendants could open up the Mac and have a little chat with you.
Yeah. Like,
That would be weird, wouldn't it? Plus,
would you do that?
photo album, you could talk to a simulation of your ancestors.
Because Robin said that she wouldn't want to see relatives pass, and that might be a thing, or because I'd be really interested to see just growth within like 2-3 decades, not decades, centuries.
Growth of what?
Just like technology, of people, evolution. Like, will we go through this cyberpunk world?
Oh, what you mean? Right. So what you're saying is, if you could upload your actual consciousness to a machine, would you do it?
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying? Right. That's different. Yeah. Oh God. I don't know. I don't like the idea.
And there's a they'll
Depends if my wife's listening or not.
But then, like, you'll never be able to, like, you can't, like, self-destruct because your consciousness is in the cloud. Like, someone could just download you and put you on. I think that goes back to, you remember that Futurama episode where, like, Fry wants a girlfriend, and he goes into the internet and he downloads Lucy Lou onto like a fake you.
Oh yeah.
Do you
blank
remember that
canvas,
episode?
yeah.
But that would be it. Like, would you ever consent to having your consciousness in like the banks of the cloud?
God, I'm not sure.
Well, presumably as well, the cloud would allow your fake neurons to fire at such a faster rate.
What if you decide you want to? What if you want to die eventually? And your consciousness is just stuck in this machine.
This loop.
And if computers run 1,000 times faster than the biological processes in your brain, then you'd get bored in about 2 months. It would be the equivalent of like 400 years.
Yeah, you're just trapped for eternity in this boredom. Yeah,
So probably a no.
I'm going with no at the moment.
Well, yeah, I mean, I had this conversation with a similar conversation at least with, it's like, would you extend your lifespan indefinitely if they could, if they could just give you an injection that would add another 100 years to it?
Will your body still be good? Because I feel like I'd happily go into like a full bionic thing just so I have like sweet legs and like I could just climb mountains in a day.
Yeah,
Like,
I guess that's
wanna-
kind of different. Now you're putting my consciousness in a cyborg.
Yeah, I'd want to I want to run at like 400 miles an hour.
Yeah,
and
well,
just,
I might sign up for that one. I don't want just my mind to be in the cloud.
It's just- you're
But
just
if
put you in a
if I've
fat
got a
AI.
robot body, yeah,
no, like a robot, like they can design you however you want.
done.
I'd want
I'm having a robot
I'd
body.
want full carbon fiber legs with like hydraulics. And
I want to be a rhino. I
Well,
want to be
that's
a I want to be a
conversation.
transformer.
Would you want to have your consciousness in an animal? If that was an option, like, do you want to be a giraffe?
I wouldn't be a giraff.
I want
I'm
to
just saying, like,
I'd be a
be a
bird,
naked mole rat.
the noble slug.
Do you know there's an antelope called a Kirk's dick?
of course you know that.
Yeah, I don't want to be that.
Oh, there always. No, there is a. I don't know, but I think it's just called Dick Dick. I don't think it's called Kirk's Dick Dick.
It's absolutely called Kirk's dick. you can shorten it if you like, but
Animal. I've always thought I would resemble some sort of like an elephant. Like that would be
Yeah.
my
I've always
animal.
thought silverback gorilla was my
Yeah.
spirit animal. What's your spirit animal, man?
Yeah, I've often thought leopard.
Leopard, yeah.
Yeah.
I'll give you
Dig it.
a
I
leopard.
could dig it.
So, Matt, tell us about your PhD thesis.
Oh right.
How have you found ways of describing it to lay people effectively? People tend to just go, what?
Well, actually, so I do give outreach presentations sometimes. There's a astronomy club nearby where I've given a couple of talks, and I've given some at UEA, which basically do exactly that. The sort of 45-minute presentations on the basics of what I do. I get some pretty clever questions at the end, which leads me to believe at least some of people have understood it.
What is the title? What's the subject?
Well, I call that talk "What is a Photon?" And basically I sort of go through, because my research is in a field called quantum physics, which I don't know if
Sounds
you've ever heard of.
badass.
It is pretty badass. But essentially, at the end of the 1800s, most physicists or most scientists thought that we were coming to the end of physics. So Newton had described the way the planets work and his laws of motion, and you can fire a cannonball and you can predict almost exactly where it will land. There are some questions you can't answer precisely, like actually if you've got a sun with multiple planets going around it, you can't with arbitrary, well, you can't exactly know the location of any of those in the future, but you can solve them with essentially a computer. So what that means is they thought they were coming to the end of physics. They thought the world was completely describable, what they call like deterministic, which means that if you know the current state of the universe and the laws of physics and you just press play, you can predict with arbitrary accuracy any future state. Then Einstein and Heisenberg and Schrödinger, some other people as well, came along and actually started like tugging at these like loose ends, and it turned out that actually none of what people believed about the way physics was true. And in fact, the way most people think of elementary particle physics is that it just is like snooker balls going around and like bumping into each other and interacting with forces and things like that, repelling and stuff. But actually, it's a lot weirder than that. You get, well, for one thing, particles, so like an electron, for example, it doesn't have a specific trajectory. If you look at it 1 second and it's there, and then you look at it another second, it's somewhere else, it didn't take the path that you would imagine a cannonball took, for example. It takes all possible paths, and all of these multiple histories interfere with each other, and they produce results that are sort of completely counterintuitive. And that's basically what quantum physics is. It's the way to describe the world in this sort of, well, it turns out that the subatomic world has an element of randomness that you can't get around. It's not randomness in the sense of you flick a coin and it's heads or tails, because that's not really true randomness. Because if you had a computer that saw exactly the force of your thumb and saw exactly the angle that was hit, it could actually predict whether it's heads or tails. It's not true randomness. In the quantum world, there is no possible way to predict whether or not a certain outcome. You can only predict the probability that an electron will be here in the future. So it was pretty revolutionary at the time. Yeah.
That's amazing. It was actually quite interesting, because I was talking with someone yesterday about, there's a website, I think it's called Babbel or something, and he's saying that every possible, like they said on this site, every book that's ever been written or ever will be written is on this site. And this is because the computer's generated just so many, just like there is limited amount of text sequences that have been put in place. So no matter what you think that the book could be about, it's already been written, because it's already generated that text formation. So they're saying that actually language and text is limited. There is an unlimited amount of sequences.
So is that like the infinite monkeys type thing? You know,
Yeah,
they're just
sort of
randomly
made me think of.
Yeah, but there is a number at the end. Like there is limited. There's not unlimited amount of text sequences, because there's only so many letters, so many things.
Words.
So if we wrote a poem now that was like a page long, and you searched Babbel for it, it would be in there already.
It would already be in there, because it's already generated that text sequence.
There was a young man from Nantucket.
Even and I mean, it will include gibberish. It's like, it could just be like so many. Again, with the monkey example.
Yeah, God.
It's just amazing.
That's amazing.
I haven't checked it out yet, but I just thought that was so interesting.
Matt, your research though, didn't you do something with twisting light?
Yeah. So we're at the end of the 1900s, where people thought particles were billiard balls. Most people's opinion of what light is that it's a wave, sort of like the ripples on the surface of a pond. And waves sort of interfere. Like, so if you dropped two stones at the same time in just different locations on a lake, eventually the two concentric, rings that appeared around them, they eventually interact with each other. And if one wave is going up at the same time the other wave is going down, you just get a sort of momentary sort of passage of stillness. Now Newton actually predated that idea of waves. That idea of waves came from someone called Maxwell, who was around he was a Scottish mathematician around in the 1800s. But Newton predated him, and Newton thought that light came in what he called like corpuscles. So basically, same sort of thing, snooker balls. He thought there was a light or a candle produced these sort of like, little balls that would hit off things and then enter your eye. And the reason he thought that is because he sort of knew pretty well what he was doing when he polished mirrors. He said that things look blurry because these billiard balls are hitting this rough surface and they're bouncing off in all random directions, and you're getting a random. But then when you polish it smooth, it's a flat surface, and you can see images which sort of makes sense. But it actually turns out that the truth is a combination of these two things. depending on what experiment you do, light sometimes behaves like a particle and it sometimes behaves like a wave, and you can actually construct experiments where it behaves like both or neither. And these particles of light are called photons. That's the current sort of terminology. Actually, Einstein was one of the first people to describe photons in that way. In 1905. In fact, that was the only thing he ever won the Nobel Prize for. He did loads of stuff, some of which was pretty amazing. But that was the only thing that was experimentally verified at the time, and was therefore given. He got the Nobel Prize for that. Anyway, so these particles of light, they have properties. So they have properties like energy, and energy is exactly the same as colour. So what that means is if you have a photon that's red, it's very low energy, and if you have a photon that's blue, it's very high energy, and you get things in between, and then that's only a very small part of the spectrum, and you can actually have particles that are more and less energetic that you can't see with your eye but can be detected. So ultraviolet radiation, for example, that's even more energetic than blue light. And a lot of things can be understood just from that sort of simple picture. But it also has other properties as well. So one of the properties is spin, and essentially spin is roughly analogous to what you consider to be a spin, so like a spinning ball. But it turns out photons can only spin in one of two ways. It can either spin left or it can spin right, with a it's not quite right to say this, but with one certain speed. So anytime you measure a photon, it will either have left spin or right spin. So people realised that you could encode information in that way. So you could say, let's call left-handed light 0 and let's call right-handed light 1, and you can send information in that way. Now then it turned out that in the 70s it was discovered that there was a different type of twist that light could have, and this type of spin was called orbital angular momentum, compared with this spin angular momentum that was mentioned a second ago. And that can not only be left and right, but it can be left 1, left 2, left 3, left 4, left 5, left 5, and then in the right you can have right 1, right 2, right 3, right 4. So really there's an infinite number of ways that you can twist light in this particular way. So people sort of were really excited at the time because they thought it meant that you could encode essentially an infinite amount of information just into a single photon, which roughly speaking is true. But it turns out there are fundamental reasons why you can't convey all of that information. And a paper that I wrote recently basically had an upper bound on what that is. Roughly speaking, you can encode about 3 times as much information into a single photon than the current best experiments do. But my paper says no further. If you start to encode more information than that, then you actually get a reduction in information for some strange reason.
Can you think of a visual metaphor to explain the different types of left spin, right spin, or is it just measurable, or can you actually think of?
No, so you can think of it, and the reason it's called spin and orbital is that if you have a big sort of square on the table here with a thin film of, say, oil, you can put these little Teflon beads, micro-sized beads, and then you shine a laser light on top of it. If your light has left or right-handed spin, some of the light is absorbed by these Teflon particles and they start to spin on their own axis. Whereas if you construct a beam that has no spin angular momentum, but it does have this orbital angular momentum, these Teflon particles, they start to orbit the center of the beam. So on the center of the beam, they are exactly equivalent. But that's how this angular momentum becomes sort of physical in terms of how it interacts with matter.
Wow.
That's really amazing. Do you think it could be used can you decode it in a way that you can use those photons as data transfers? Like, let's say I want to just stream information to you with just like a tiny like photon, and then you'd just be like, you'd have that.
So one of the common sort of analogies that people used to say in the field is that one of the common questions was, can you encode? Can you put a full picture in one photon? Is there enough information? And I don't know about the actual numbers, but you can certainly fit a bloody huge amount of information in a single photon. But if you fully utilise the current technology, some experiments have shown that, it was done in Vienna, I think. So if you sit on one side of a river with a receiver and on the other bank of the river with a transmitter, you can send something like 6 DVDs per second worth of information.
Wow.
So it's a huge amount, and it's currently just in the sort of beginning stages, but it at least is possible.
That could be like the next
fibre optics.
Yeah, the next data transfer is just something just absolutely incredible. Amazing how we can utilize this sort of information.
But the thing that I always found amazing about it is that I'm just like a bit of a lowly theorist. So I just sit in an office and do some maths on a piece of paper, or do some computer simulations and stuff. When you like look at the people that do the actual experiments, you're like, oh my god, this is real. What we predicted those years ago, it turns out to be the truth. Or
Right.
Because there's quite a bit of an interesting interplay between sort of theorists and experimentalists.
It tends to be quite different, very different disciplines.
Yeah, they really are. And you do get some people that have hybrid roles, and it's always very impressive to me to see those people, because I think it does attract different types.
How can you develop the theory without an experiment in mind?
I thought
surely they go together.
Yeah.
Well, it normally happens in one of two different ways. Either an experiment will be done and it displays some behaviour that is not expected by the current theory, so the theoreticians will get on it and go, well, we'll try and work out what the point is there.
Yeah.
Or the other way around. So some years ago, me and my PhD supervisor and some of the people we worked with, we came up with a method for creating this orbital angular momentum, light with orbital angular momentum, and we put it out there. I presented it at a conference in Glasgow, and we submitted a couple of papers and stuff, and we got quite a lot of interest in it. And then some experimentalists came to us after one of my talks and said, "All right, well, how would we actually build this?" And we were like, well, don't know.
Right.
We were hoping you would know.
Yeah. That's interesting. I never realised that. So you sort of have a thought experiment and think, this could be happening.
Mm-hmm.
If it were happening, this would be how the mathematics would work.
Yeah.
So if someone thinks of a way of testing it,
they
can then refer to this mathematics to check if their experimentation was worked.
So exactly. So what we actually did, we said, if you take 3 nano antennas, which are like metal rods essentially, but they are nano, so a few billionths of a centimetre. No, right, a few millionths of a centimetre, pretty small. And you put them in this certain arrangement, and then you excited them by sort of shining certain light on them or doing various other bits and bobs. It would generate orbital angular momentum in a certain direction. So then they came to us and said, well, we can't do nano rods like that. Experimentally, we can't do it. Would it work if this was the case? And we said, well, not really, but maybe if you did it this way. So there was a bit of like back and forth, because obviously if you're just doing computer simulations, you can do whatever you want, and you can run the simulation without any constraints.
And how accurate are those computer simulations? Is that like quite bound by technology at the moment, or can you do basically whatever you want?
So there's the main technique that's used in most of physics for computer simulations is something, basically, you take the area that, so say you want to look at what these nanorods are doing. You'll place your nanorods into the simulation, and then you put a box around it, and you make that box into like 1,000 or 1,000,000 tiny little boxes, and you solve the equations in each of those boxes, and then just move forward just a tiny fraction of a second, and then you solve it all again, and then you keep doing it, so it's like an iterative, like an algorithm type thing. But these are really like computationally like very expensive in terms of they take, even very basic ones take 8 hours or days sometimes. So yeah,
That's so cool. That's amazing.
Wow. Yeah. It's cool stuff.
So what do you do for a living, Doug?
Oh God, yeah. Went to a comedy show yesterday.
did you?
And I was like, I'd always thought a comedy show. I was like, I'd hate to be the one that the comedian picks out and just rips a new one.
was that you?
It was me.
Oh no. Were you
It
wearing
was-
something like? Were you just sitting in the front row?
Yeah, just sitting in the front row. It was alright. It was really funny though. But he did it to a couple of other people, and one of them got super defensive. And then his wife started chipping in and defending him.
Oh, that's embarrassing.
I was like, oh no.
You just
But
got to take it,
was-
haven't you? You can't really.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it was funny. I'll give it to him.
Because for one thing, they've got a microphone, so if you're shouting, people
And
can't hear
there's
you.
no, you can't. If you defend yourself, you look like an idiot.
One of my friends got ripped by Jimmy Carr, I think,
Really?
and he was like, "Look at you all dressed up. You're really smart, aren't you? What do you work on? A call centre?" And at the time, we did all call centres. And he had to go, "Yes, I do actually."
Yeah, it was like, oh, fair enough. I thought, I went with the tact, I'm just going to be so polite that he feels bad. And so, do you enjoy your job? I went, yes, I do actually. Thank you for asking.
Passive aggressive. Do you?
Oh dear, what's funny though?
And then you need to like laugh aggressively when they do it for someone else, because then the guy will think this is better picking on this guy. It seems to be getting better reactions.
Yeah. But he did do well. There was one woman who was sort of heckling. She was just so drunk.
Oh,
she
no.
had a glass of wine. Alex was sitting next to me. He went, "Look at her wine. Look how much she's got." And it was one of those big glasses, and it was full to the top. It was like a whole bottle of red wine.
Bring your own booze.
But he handled it so well. But then towards the end, because he was introducing each act and then going in between. But towards the end, he was sort of encouraging it. He just took ownership of it, made it part of the act.
I don't know if it's just an act of just like self-flagellation, but I would quite like to find some little town in the middle of nowhere where no one knows me and try to do a stand-up set.
Yeah.
Because if it started going really badly after 5 minutes, you could just run out the door and get in your car and go, no, that didn't happen. That was someone else that looked like me.
Yeah.
I wouldn't want to know what to talk about. What stories?
Yeah, it's hard, isn't it? And you'd have to bomb just to work out what works.
Yeah.
I feel like it'd be interesting seeing how comedians do test their new material, because a lot of it's going to not work, isn't
They
it?
do,
But
don't they?
I guess it's working out how to handle when they don't work in a elegant way, sort of moving on and going, oh well, that didn't work. Just move on to the next one. But there's something about admitting that you're trying to be funny.
Yeah.
It's sort of another. It's one thing doing it on a.
At least like if you're giving like a best man speech or something, like everyone's on your side and they want to laugh. Whereas like if you're going up there, I feel like the people have just got their arms crossed going, go on then, make me laugh, funny man.
Yeah.
There is a difference between, I think it was like Bert Kreischer, I don't know if you watch his stuff, he's on like Joe Rogan and Tom Segura and all this.
Yeah.
And they spoke about a bit where it's different where you go to a comedy club and people pay to go, and then people that just like turn up like in a mall or something.
Yeah.
It's like if you just do it for free at a place, people will probably be more likely just to have a laugh.
Mm-hmm.
But then if you pay to see a show, you're like, it's gotta be good. So you can't start charging, I guess, if you're.
My brother was telling me about this. I think it was a radio show or a podcast or something where they got famous comedians on and said, tell us about a time you bombed.
Mm.
And I mean, at least in Russell Brand's, his original autobiography, the book he worked, there's a whole section on when he was just, when he was mad. He was on stage and he brought like dead animals on stage and was like hitting them with hammers and like
my God.
throwing them into the audience and stuff, like cutting himself.
Oh, what?
Yeah. It sounds.
Christ.
Obviously he was off his tits on drugs, but
It's pretty,
I don't know.
It's pretty bizarre.
Maybe it was funny.
Yeah. It's been an hour. I think maybe
Has
that's
it?
a good place to end.
Okay.
We should, throw a dead animal at the
Yeah.
No, that was awesome. That was really cool.
I've enjoyed this chat.
Yeah, cool. Me too.
Thank you for joining us,
That's all right.
Matt. I never actually introduced you.
Oh yeah.
Matt
Matt.
Coles.
I'm Matt. Hi.
Thank you for joining us on Faffing About. And let's end. Goodbye.